You know AAA Gaming is in trouble when developers and studios are even coming out and calling out some of the glaring problems. You can find no shortage of videos here on YouTube talking about AAA Gaming, the problems, the writing, how we're just getting diminishing returns the more expensive that games get. And overall, most of those in the industry that are the loudest voices in the industry can't seem to put a pin on why the problem exists. However, there are a few developers out there, thankfully, that are pointing out the issue and saying what it is. They're not sugarcoating it, and they're talking about why the layoffs are happening. And overall, I think we need to highlight those developers and highlight those companies, because I think those are the ones that are the future of gaming. So here today, I want to go over an article talking about that exact issue coming from the Saber Interactive team, or the guys that gave you Space Marine 2 from last year. So over here on GameSpot, incredibly expensive video games are not necessary and contribute to job losses, exec says. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's appropriate. So Saber Interactive founder Matthew Karch has shared some pointed words about the state of the AAA video game market. Speaking to reporter Steven Tatilo aboard a private jet that he paid $23 million for, well, that's relevant to the article, Karch said incredibly expensive AAA games may become a thing of the past and are contributing to the string of job losses in the market. I think that the age of the 200 million, 300 million, 400 million AAA game is on its way out. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's appropriate, Karch said. The executive went on to say that he believes the cost associated with making such big budget games may help explain why the video game industry is seeing so many layoffs today. I don't know how best to put it. I think if anything has contributed more to the loss of jobs, it's the multi-$100 million budgets, he said. In 2023, Karch Beacon Interactive bought certain assets from Saber's parent company, Embracer, as part of a divestiture from Embracer's business operation in Russia. It was this time that Karch and Embracer officially parted ways, with Beacon effectively buying Saber out of Embracer. Before this, Karch lamented how games are getting cut left and right due to certain economic conditions within the video game business. So this was back in 2023. That's insane. This guy was calling it out years ago, which he should have been, which a lot of people should have been. The consolidation it's been going through in the industry is going to hurt that as well. And the costs and the turmoil that the industry has been going through, teams will regroup, but the capital at the moment, it just isn't there, he told GI.biz. And so the industry is actually contracting somewhat, and the supply of content is going to be way short of the demand. I do disagree with him there on the demand and the supply, because the fact of the matter is there are so many games coming out nowadays, and with most gamers, I would argue a lot of gamers being full-time working adults, because all of us grew up with them, I think that we definitely only are going to be able to purchase a few games a year. But moving on, Karch also questioned the $70 price point for games, saying he would prefer not to charge that much and believes it's almost not fair to do so. He cited Helldivers 2, which launched at $40, as being an example of a lower-priced game that went on to enjoy huge success. One of Saber's biggest recent releases was 2024's Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, which was priced at $70, despite what Karch thinks about that price point. Saber's Tim Willis, commenting on the success of Space Marine 2, said it's a sad truth that many game studios declare a game a failure if it doesn't sell 5 million copies. I mean, what business are we in if you fail if you sell less than 5 million copies, he said. Overall, I think this is absolutely fantastic, and I have seen a plethora of articles the last 5 or 6 months where more and more developers are coming out talking about the absolutely massive cost of AAA gaming. You see, it's really funny that every time we see these games come out and we're like, oh my goodness, they're going to have to sell $10 million just to make their budget back, let alone go even further and actually become profitable. You see, it was just recently reported that EA was expecting to get 3 million sales on Dragon Age Veilguard, and most likely that still would not have been a profitable game, but it would have been an acceptable loss for the company as it's being reported by a ton of people. How can you go and think that $3 million, 3 million sales, which would equate to many more millions of dollars, could be a failure for a game? Well, it's because they're not putting their time, effort, and energy in the places that they need to. You see so many of these AAA gaming studios throughout the years have just decided, well, as long as we sink more money into it, we will probably get more money out of it. And that doesn't necessarily hold true. You see, the gaming industry has kind of hit a plateau. Graphics and graphical fidelity really hasn't gone up over the last console generation, and it really hasn't gotten crazy. And a lot of the games that have been doing very, very well are games that just have video game ass graphics. Like, why do we need to have hyper photo realistic graphics when most people are just cool playing a video game? Going back to Space Marine 2, that's an absolutely awesome game that a lot of people played. People bought it, they played it, they had a good time with it, and they set it down, and they're probably on to a new game at this point. You see a lot of games out there that are doing absolutely fantastic are those that have smaller budgets. The studios out there celebrating success like Metaphor ReFantazio, the studio that was behind Black Myth Wukong. One of my favorite games of 2024, which was Power World with Pocket Pairs, celebrating absolutely massive successes. And a lot of those games, yeah, they might have released for anywhere from $30 to $70, but they made their money back, and they definitely didn't sell insanely well. Well, except for Black Myth Wukong, but that tapped into the Chinese market in a way that a lot of other games companies just can't do. So it's really interesting to see what they were talking about in 2023. These guys that are developers, they are making games, and they look at it and they think, man, it's pretty ridiculous that we have to charge people $70. It's also pretty ridiculous that in order to be considered successful, you have to sell 5 million copies. It's like, what are you doing with your money? And I think that more developers need to come out and speak up to this. The sad fact of the matter is I think that those developers that are out there that won't say anything about this are probably developers that are owned by the stock market. They're owned by their investors. Any game company that has investors that say, nope, you need to make that money line go up, well, those tend to be the video games. Those tend to be the games that nobody likes. They tend to be the games that fail, and they fail critically hard. How can you justify the growing expenses of all of this stuff when the creativity level and the player base just really isn't there? I mean, yes, you can say that the gaming industry is the largest entertainment medium on the planet, but, well, we're not really seeing more and more gamers get into it. We're just selling the games to the same guys that have been there for the last 20 years. And some of them have fallen off, and the kids nowadays are playing it, but overall, games spending doesn't grow the way that a lot of these companies think. They want to try to tap into untapped markets, and that's why they try to do all the DEI inclusion and things like that, thinking, oh, we're going to find this magical, miracle, modern audience that just doesn't exist. You see, gaming, at least the gaming audience, has pretty much reached a ceiling. Yeah, there will be some growth as time goes on, but not the growth necessary to see these ballooning budgets. I would imagine that if you put a graph of the gaming audience and its growth next to a graph of the amount of money that's being spent on video games, you're going to see a wild disparity. These game companies are spending so much more money based off of the amount of players that are actually there, based off of the amount of players that can actually afford to play their games. And then because these players aren't out there, or they're not interested, or the lack of creativity in the industry just is at an all-time high, you know, the fact that they just want to sit there and gouge the wallets of so many people, which just turns gamers off from a lot of games. The fact that the economy's kind of in a rough spot right now. I mean, all of these factors play in, and yet the AAA gaming industry thought it was wise to start spending $400 million on games. I mean, the only game that I know of that can actually get away with that is Call of Duty, and that's just because it's Call of Duty. One could argue that most of the games that are out there and most of the gaming audience that is out there is probably in games like Call of Duty and a lot of mobile games. But for some reason, the gamers that are out there that just are in the space for RPGs or in the space for third-person shooters and things like that, that really hasn't gone up a whole lot. And to be perfectly honest, the money that's being spent, well, it's just ridiculous. So next time they decide that they want to spend $100 million or $200 million or $400 million on a game, maybe they should stop and think, well, wait a minute. Are we going to make money at this? Because I don't think they do. Or, like I said in my most recent video, I think they're just lying to their investors. And to be perfectly honest, I think what we should do, we should probably start a movement to get investors out of gaming. Because honestly, once the investors got involved, quality declined and experiences started disappearing. You know, we all talk about the good old days and how come games aren't like that and how come there's no innovation anymore. Well, I think we know the answer, and I think it's the investors. So, to be perfectly honest, I think we need to start looking at the budgets. And if a gaming budget gets over $200 million, we as gamers should probably start throwing up the red flags at that point. And I do want to commend more studios that are coming out, like the Saber Interactive guys here, for actually pointing out the glaring issue with all of this. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for checking out A Drink with Crazy. Let me know what you think about the overbloated budgets and the massive spending. It's absolutely crazy. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear what your thoughts are on Saber Interactive. And for those of you who've made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for checking out the channel. Maybe consider subscribing. Oh, good Lord, I can't talk. So consider subscribing if that's what you want to do. And I've got some merch down below to check out. I need to work on some new designs. Time tends to get away from me. But thank you all so much for checking out the channel. And as always, until next time, cheers, everybody.